Welcome, dear listener, to Go to Sleep Historian. Tonight, we return to the heart of a medieval fortress, a place of watchful silence, iron gates, and loyal hearts. Here, under torchlight and moon, guards once kept their vigil through endless winter nights. In this story, we'll follow them through the cold, along stone corridors and frosted towers, to see how they endured the darkness and awaited the warmth of dawn settled in now. Let your breath slow. And before we begin, if you're visiting our channel for the first time, we warmly invite you to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts below. Your support helps us keep these quiet histories alive. Now, let us begin. Night watch in the castle. How medieval guards slept through freezing nights. A cold wind skates across the battlements, long after the last meal bowl has been cleared and the great hall's laughter has faded. Stone, patient and slow, takes the shape of the castle. Thick walls that hold memory as surely as they hold cold. In that slow hush, a lone sentinel moves in the torchlight, boots whispering along flagstones worn by 100 winters. He is a small figure within the work of centuries. A man who spends more nights than days in the company of moonlight and old mortars. And tonight, as on countless nights before, he asks the same quiet question every human being asks. When warmth grows scarce, how to sleep without freezing. Castles are not made for comfort. They are shelters built for defense. Their towers and halls designed to resist siege rather than preserve heat. Yet within that pragmatic geometry there are clever refuges of warmth. A hearth at the base of a great hall that throws a reluctant generosity of heat. A narrow passage where a brazier can be sheltered from wind. A south-facing solar that drinks the daylight and stores a fraction of summer warmth into autumn. Guards learn these pockets, as one learns the safe places on a ship by habit, by the sting of cold, by the slow education of sleepless nights. They hang tapestries where the draft is sharp. They hang animal skins on benches and under the head. And they borrow the human warmth of a comrade when watch shifts permit. Many small comforts add up. Rugs laid over flagstones, mattresses stuffed with straw and wool, looping blankets folded close. Clothing matters almost more than bedding. Linen next to the skin, woolen tunics and hose outside it, a thick cloak folded at the knees. These layers are the language of medieval warmth. A guard will not sleep stripped down. He will sleep ready to rise. Boots are never far from the pallet, and a coiffure cap is kept even during slumber, because a great deal of heat escapes from the head. Leather herkine, padded gambeson, a woolen mantle. These are not extravagances, but practical insulation. When weather is sharpest, the sentries may tuck themselves nearly fully clothed into their bedding, hands wrapped around a small warmed stone or a bowl of warmed broth. In some regions, a heated brick or a wrapped bottle of warm water will be slipped among the straw to hold a slow, steady heat through the shallow hours. The placement of the sleeping pallet answers another part of the problem. Sentries who must be near the gate sleep in the guardroom beneath the gatehouse, where the mass of the gate and adjacent walls trap the least of the wind. Tower sentinels favor the inner face of the tower, where the thickness of stone means the cold comes later and less sharply. Those on the upper wall, exposed to open air, short-change sleep and rely more on rotation than comfort. They heat themselves briefly at brazier and then return to their post. Underground chambers, storerooms and cellars, once their pens of grain and casks are tended, provide surprisingly temperate places to rest because they are insulated by earth, where available. Small inner rooms called solaris, often nearer to the lord-esque private chambers and facing the sun, become coveted refuges for weary watchers during daytime rests. Warmth is also wisdom. Guards stagger their shifts and steal sleep in snippets. A system of turns. The first watcher. The second watcher, the sleeper who remains ready, ensures that no single body bears the whole night. Sleep is fragmentary and precious. A half hour on a low pallet, an hour by a brazier. A nap in a corner warmed by the day is a stored heat. In winter, brigades sometimes pair so one remains at post while the other curls into a small nest of straw and blankets. When the bell tolls or an alarm is sounded, sleep ends with practiced speed. These patterns, rotation, paired rest, and shortness of sleep, make a guard's night survivable even if they are never luxurious. Fuel is a currency, wood and peat, dried manure. Where timber is scarce, charcoal carefully rationed, all these feed the braziers that will briefly make a night tolerable. In many fortresses, the Lord Steward controlled fuel distribution, and the guardes' small privileges in war members depended on supply and on the Lordes. Concern for garrison morale. When stores were low or winters cruel, improvisation followed. Straw bales, used as wet wool tucked close to the body as a temporary shield, and the deliberate conservation of heat by closing shutters and corridors. Tapestries function as insulation as much as decoration. Hung thickly across hearthless walls, they trap pockets of warmer air and soften the harshness of stone. Not every night demanded silence. Bells, dogs, and watchmen's calls punctuate the dark when danger stirs, but much of the long night is a quiet measured by small sounds. The drip in a gutter, the creak of timber as mortar breathes the measured step of a relief on his round. The sentinel's sleep is not the deep oblivion of a peasant after a day's labor. It is light and responsive, threaded with vigilance. Dreams, when they come, are short and sharp. The body is tuned to be pierced by the slightest alarm. In some accounts, guards keep simple habits to quicken their waking, pinching their wrists before closing eyes, keeping a small pebble in their hand to rattle on waking, or sleeping with the sword within reach. Habit becomes a technology of survival. There is also a fellowship in the cold. Near the hearth, soldiers share bowls of hot soup and tailies that push back the wind. The speaking voice warms as much as the brazier. Humor and small courtesies carry through the night. One man trading his cloak for another's bread, a quiet hand to tie a coif, the three-word blessing before sleep. In many wales, the social fabric of the guardroom functions as insulation equal to any wall, a brotherhood of watch, exchanging warmth and vigilance against the same dark. Finally, geography and era change the picture. A castle in the Irish mist uses peat and earth. A fortress in the dry Spanish plain uses thick shutters and sun-warmed stones, and a Scandinavian keep makes generous use of firs and compact hearths. But across these differences, one truth holds. Medieval men faced cold with layers of adaptation rather than a single perfect solution. When the moon slides toward dawn and the watch shifts come to their end, the memories of night are not only of frostbitten fingers and patched cloaks, but as small comforts won by craft habit and the quiet communal work of keeping one another alive through the long hours. So the sentinel rises when his turn comes, shaking the last sleep from shoulders stiff with cold, pulling his cloak tight and stepping once more into torchlight and the slow blue of pre-dawn. He moves along the parapet with the courage of practice rather than the romance of legend. Not the heroic sleep of epics, but the steady, stubborn sleep of men who must be ready to trade rest for duty without complaint. In that steady reserve there is its own warmth, the knowledge that in stone and in men, old designs and newer habits combine to make the night survivable. The cold within the walls of a medieval castle, are both its strength and its curse. By daylight they rise in solid dignity, sun glancing from the rough gray faces of stone. But when night settles and the torches gutter in their brackets, those same stones draw the warmth out of everything they touch. The air inside becomes a quiet, slow-moving thing, heavy with damp, touched by the smell of ash and cold mortar. Even the brave and battle-hardened know that a winter night in a stone keep tests endurance in ways the battlefield does not. The cold does not enter suddenly. It seeps. It begins at the flagstones, creeping upward, curling around the ankles of anyone who lingers too long in stillness. Guards learn to move not only to stay awake, but to keep their blood from stiffening in their veins. They stamp their boots softly against the floor, rub their gloved hands together, and keep their cloaks close as if the garment itself were a wall between worlds. One of breath and warmth, the other of ancient chill. The castle holds centuries of wind in its pores. Every draft that winds through an arrow slit carries with it the memory of a storm long past. Within those walls, warmth is an act of strategy. Every chamber, every corridor, has its own temperament. The great hall, with its towering hearth, remains the castle's single heart of heat. Flames leap there, not only for comfort, but for show, a sign of life, and a fortress built to withstand death. Yet the further one walks from that hearth, the colder the world becomes. Beyond the hall lies a network of stone arteries, narrow stairs twisting like frozen rivers, storage rooms where barrels frost over, and guard rooms where a single brazier glows like a captured sun. The men on watch know the rhythm of these places by heart. They mark their patrols not by distance but by warmth, where the corridor breathes warmer, where the draft grows cruel. At the inner turn of a spiral stair, one can pause and feel the trapped breath of the day's fire. At the outer bend, the night wind finds its path through the arrow slit, slicing across the face like a blade. The castle teaches its watchers to know these invisible tides of temperature, the same way a sailor reads the sea. In the upper towers, the cold is more honest. There is no pretense of comfort there, only the direct meeting of man and winter. Stone ribs form the tower's walls, and between them the night air whispers and sighs. A guard leaning upon the crenellation feels the weight of frost gathering on his cloak. He peers outward and sees the land in silence. A silvered field, a stand of sleeping trees, the faint glow of a village hearth in the far distance. That distant warmth is almost cruel in its reminder. The tower sentinel must be both exposed and awake. If he's lucky, his post grants him a brazier or the small blessing of a wooden stool to rest a moment. If not, his warmth is borrowed from motion and courage. Inside the keep, the wall's thickness plays a double role. During daylight hours, the deep stone acts as a reservoir, holding whatever warmth the sun or fires can lend. But by midnight, that same stone turns traitor, releasing its hoarded chill back into the air. The process is so slow and so constant that many believe the castle itself breathes exhaling cold, inhaling warmth. The phenomenon is no illusion. It is physics written in medieval language, and so the castle lives its nightly rhythm, inhaling, exhaling, and the guards must breathe with it. In the lower corridors, beneath the weight of the castle's upper floors, the air is stiller. Here the cold is less sharp, but more complete. A steady, bone-deep coolness that never quite leaves, not even in summer. These are the spaces where guards sometimes find refuge between rounds. Near the kitchens, the buttery, or beside the small side holes that border storerooms. A kitchen's oven, even banked and silent, radiates the ghost of its fire. A barrel of ale stands cool but not frozen. In these modest refuges, warmth is never abundant, yet the absence of wind feels like grace. Each layer of the castle has its own weather. In the great hall, fire roars. In the towers, frost bites. In the cellars, the air holds steady and thick. To move through a castle at night is to cross climates. Within a few steps, guards shift from the damp coolness of stone halls to the dry heat near the hearth, their bodies tightening and loosening with each change. They know how to measure comfort by sound. The crack of a log means brief relief ahead, while the hollow whistle of wind means another turn through the frozen dark. The materials themselves speak of the season. Wood contracts and creaks, iron hinges moaned with frost, and tapestries stiffen where moisture has settled. The torches burn unevenly, sometimes flaring, sometimes choking in the drafts. Shadows move with every small wind, making the corridors appear alive. These details, so small by daylight, grow immense by midnight. For a guard standing alone, a single wavering shadow can feel like a presence. And yet, such unease, like the cold becomes familiar. A veteran watchman no longer fears the moving dark, only the stillness that suggests something waiting beyond it. To fight cold, the castle was designed with clever geometry. Narrow passageways reduce air movement. Low doorways conserve heat. Some keeps feature internal shutters, made of thick wood or leather, fitted over windows and arrow slits to block the wind. Floors above the kitchens are prized sleeping quarters because warmth rises through the stone. Nobles claim these rooms, but guards, when luck allows, sometimes sleep near them. A wall shared with the kitchen can mean the difference between comfort and frostbite. Even stairwells, coiled tightly and windowless, trap small pockets of warmth. A secret many a tired guard is discovered, while leaning a moment on the inside curve, shielded from the draft. Every castle is a compromise between defense and comfort. The larger the fortress, the harder it is to heat. Smaller keeps, built of wood and earth, sometimes fare better than grand stone citadels. Timber holds warmth longer, and its walls breathe differently, though it carries the risk of fire. Still, the stone castle remains the pinnacle of safety, even as it demands endurance from its inhabitants. The cold, in its way, becomes another gate to be guarded, a quiet enemy that tests discipline and unity. When storms roll in across the hills, the sound of wind in the arrow slits becomes a song, low, mournful, and endless. The flames in the guardroom bend and flicker, and men pull their cloaks tighter. Some murmur prayers, others mutter curses meant for the wind itself. Yet there is beauty, too, on certain nights, when snow gathers softly on the windowsills, and the world outside glows pale and still. The interior of the castle feels suspended between centuries. The cold binds time together. The same breath that touches a guard's cheek tonight might have brushed these walls when the castle was young. For the men of the watch, the architecture is a teacher. It shows them patience. It reminds them that the body can learn to live with discomfort. That warmth, like rest, must often be earned. They know which walls to lean against, which alcoves hold less draft, which torches burn clean. The castle is both adversary and companion, a fortress of stone, a keeper of memory, and an unspoken reminder that even in the harshest cold, the human spirit adapts quietly, stubbornly, and without complaint. And so, the night continues, slow and vast. In the silence, the fortress hums with invisible life. The crackle of hidden embers, the sigh of air through corridors, the steady rhythm of boots upon the floor. The cold remains, but so did the guards. Small figures against great stone, wrapped in duty, wrapped in patience. They endure, as the castle endures, one breath, one watch, one long, frozen hour at a time. Warming the fortress, the castle walls groaned softly in the night, their ancient stones breathing cold into every corridor. Beyond the watchtower and the drafty halls, the air shimmered faintly with frost. Yet within these walls, amid the iron, stone, and silence, life endured. Slowly, patiently, people found ways to bring warmth to the fortress. Long before dawn, a faint glow flickered from the great hall, the heart of every medieval stronghold. There, in the immense fireplace, wide enough for a man to stand inside, great logs smoldered like the bones of a dying dragon. Servants tended the embers through the night, feeding them with split oak, birch, or whatever the forest could spare. The fire's crackle was a comfort against the moan of the wind outside, and even in the largest of halls, its reach was modest. A circle of warmth surrounded by endless chill. Guards, servants, and courtiers alike learned to draw close to it. They wrapped their cloaks tighter, held their hands to the glowing coals, and felt their faces bloom with brief heat before retreating again into the cold. The hearth was more than a source of warmth. It was a gathering place, a quiet pulse in the heart of the night. In smaller chambers, the means of warmth were humbler. Not every room had a fireplace. Some relied on portable braziers, iron bowls filled with coals, glowing red and breathing heat like small suns. The guards on night watch would often borrow these when the frost deepened, carrying them into gatehouses or along the battlements where the wind could slice through armor and wool alike. Sometimes, a brazier stood beside a narrow arrow slit, its glow casting trembling light along the stone walls. The guard's shadow danced with the fire's rhythm, swaying, flickering, fading. He would rest his gloved hands over the embers, the leather creaking softly as he rubbed warmth into his stiff fingers. The scent of burning charcoal mixed with the salt of sweat and the damp of stone to keep the chill from creeping through the walls. Castle dwellers used every trick they knew. Thick tapestries hung from the masonry, woven not only for beauty, but for insulation. Beneath their threads of crimson and gold, they trapped air, dueled cows, and softened the bite of winter. Floors were strewn with rushes and straw, sometimes sprinkled with fragrant herbs like lavender or sweet flag, giving the illusion of freshness even as months passed without change. Furs and hides, too, were prized treasures. The nobles wrapped themselves in ermine and sable, while guards and servants relied on sheepskin and rough wool. A heavy cloak was a man's shield against the season, and when one slept near the embers, the same cloak became a blanket, its edges curling with the scent of smoke. In the coldest towers, warmth was more an act of endurance than comfort. Guards learned to move constantly, walking the ramparts, pacing the gatehouse floors, stamping their boots to wake the blood in their toes. The flicker of torches cast long shadows along the wall walk, and every gust of wind through the crenellations brought a reminder of the night's sharpness. Inside, the kitchens provided another refuge. Long after the Lord's Supper was done, the great ovens still radiated heat. Servants would linger there, under the pretense of duty, just to feel life return to their fingers. Some guards would slip through the side doors, pretending to check on the fires, but really to steal a few breaths of warmth, and perhaps a crust of bread left from the meal. Even the stones themselves, cold and heavy, learned to hold heat. In some chambers, large blocks were warmed beside the fire, then carried 2 beds to serve as makeshift heaters. These bedstones, wrapped in cloth, would glow faintly with retained warmth through the early hours, though by morning they were as cold as the dawn. The hearth also carried ritual and meaning. Before nightfall, it was lit with quiet reverence, the flame often considered sacred. In many castles, a servant, sometimes the same one each night, was charged with keeping the fire alive until sunrise. To let it die was an omen of ill fortune, for a cold hearth meant a cold heart, and a house unguarded by its warmth was said to invite wandering spirits. In monasteries and fortified manors, fires were symbols of constancy, their glow representing not just physical comfort but divine endurance. As the wind howled outside, monks whispered prayers before the embers, their words mingling with the sigh of smoke that rose into the rafters. Through long winters, the struggle for warmth united everyone. From the Lord's chamber to the guard's outpost, wood was rationed carefully, and fires were often banked early to conserve fuel. The nights grew longer than the days, and the castle seemed to sleep in its own kind of hibernation, its life pulsing slowly under layers of frost and silence. For the guards who stood watch through the deepest hours, warmth became both memory and promise. They thought of the hearth waiting below, of hands thawing beside coals, of soup steaming in wooden bowls. Some whispered quietly to one another, sharing stories just to keep awake for talk. Like fire, warded off the cold. When storms come of the kind that rattled shutters and sent snow swirling into arrow slits, fires burned through the night. Smoke drifted lazily along the beams, mingling with the scent of resin and ash. Outside, the world froze beneath a shroud of white. But within the castle's core, the faint orange glow spoke of life continuing despite the cold. A castle's strength lay not only in its walls or weapons, but in its warmth, in the quiet labor of those who tended fires unseen, who carried logs through snow, who shielded embers from the wind. Their hands made survival possible, turning stone fortresses into homes. And so the fortress endured the winter. Firelight trembled along corridors, warming faces and hearts alike. Each flame was a guardian of its own, small, steadfast, and alive, keeping the darkness at bay until the coming of dawn. Shifts, sleep, and discipline as the night deepened and the castle's fires burned low. The rhythm of life settled into its quiet order. Beyond the glow of the great hearth, the world turned inward, a steady pulse of duty, rest, and vigilance. Within these stone walls, every soul had its place, and even in slumber, the fortress never truly slept. The guards of the night watch moved like shadows through the corridors. Their boots struck softly against the flagstones, their breath faint clouds in the cold. Each man knew his station and his hour. For in a fortress, time was kept not by clocks, but by bells and torches. When the watch changed, a small bell would toll from the courtyard tower, its chime slow and solemn, echoing across the ramparts. There were 3 watches through the night, each lasting roughly 4 hours. The first began at dusk, when the gates were barred and the torches lit. The second, called the midwatch, carried the burden of the long, frozen hours before midnight. The final watch ended at dawn, when the first streaks of light bled over the horizon and the sound of stirring servants filled the halls once more. During their shifts, the guards were expected to remain alert, for the silence of night was deceptive. It hid dangers as easily as dreams. A rustle of wind could mask the tread of an intruder. A flickering torch could betray a hidden figure. To fail in watchfulness was a grave offense, not only a breach of duty, but a risk to every soul within the walls. Yet the human body, bound to its need for rest, often tested the limits of endurance. Gods learned the art of staying awake by movement, pacing, whispering, rubbing their hands together, or leaning into the chill to shock themselves back into alertness. Some chewed bits of dried root or hard bread, others murmured prayers, repeating the same line until the rhythm itself warded off sleep. Those who faltered paid a price. In some castles, a sleeping guard could face public reprimand, loss of wages, or worse. But often, punishment came from shame rather than cruelty. For to fall asleep on watch was to let down the brother beside you, the captain above you, and the lord whose household you protected. In the quieter hours, between one watch and the next, the changing of the guard brought a momentary stir of life. Torches were passed, hand to hand. The relief detail, weary from the long day, trudged toward the warmth of the guardroom. A small, smoky chamber near the gatehouse, where a brazier glowed faintly. There, a few might stretch out on straw pallets or rough benches, pulling cloaks tight, their armor stacked beside them like loyal dogs. Sleep came quickly, heavy and dreamless, before the next spell summoned them again. Elsewhere in the castle, sleep followed its own pattern. The lord and his household slept in the sola, a chamber above the great hall, where the heat from the fire below rose through the floorboards. Heavy curtains and feathered bedding offered comfort that the lower ranks could only envy. Yet even there, sleep was often broken. The lord might rise before dawn to hear reports from messengers, or to pray. In times of unrest, he too might wake to the clang of the watch bell. Heart quickened by the echo of alarm, servants lived by another rhythm entirely. Their day began before sunrise and ended long after dusk, so their rest came in fragments short, snatched hours between tasks. The cook's helpers might nap by the ashes of the kitchen fire, curled like cats in the warmth. Stable hands dozed lightly in the hayloft, ears attuned to the restlessness of horses. The laundress might fall asleep on a bench, her hands raw from icy water. Discipline held all of this together, not through fear, but through habit and shared necessity. The castle was a living organism, and every member, from the humblest scullion to the highest knight, moved in concert with the rest. Bells marked prayer, meals, labor, and rest. Orders flowed down from the constable and the steward, carried by pages and messengers, through hallways dim with torchlight. Even in the deepest night, someone was always awake. Into chapelle, a priest or monk might whisper psalms for protection, his candle throwing soft halos of light onto the stone. In the courtyard, a groom tended to a sick horse. In the kitchen, a baker prepared dough for the next morning's bread, the scent of yeast and smoke drifting through the corridors. These unseen labors kept the rhythm of the castle alive, even as most of its inhabitants dreamed. The discipline of the guard, though, remained the spine of it all. The constable's rules were clear. No guard was to leave his post, no brazier left untended, no gate unbarred. At the start of each shift, the captain would inspect the ramparts, ensuring every torch burned bright, every weapon was ready. His presence was both reminder and reassurance. The castle's strength was its order, its unbroken vigilance. For those few hours, between midnight and dawn, the coldest, loneliest part of the night time seemed to stretch endlessly. Guards spoke little then. The only sounds were the slow tread of boots, the rattle of armor, the sigh of the wind. Sometimes, if the night was still and the moon clear, one might pause to gaze across the fields below, where frost gleamed like silver dust. In those moments, duty and dream blurred together, a kind of meditation born of exhaustion and devotion. Within the castle walls, discipline meant more than obedience. It was a bond of trust that each man would remain awake so others could rest. The kitchen fire could die, the stables could sleep, the servants could dream, because the watch held firm. It was a quiet kind of heroism, repeated every night, without song or praise. When the final bell rang and dawn began to touch the battlements, the watch changed once more. The weary men of the night shift descended from their posts, their faces pale in the pale light. They unbuckled their armor, their movements slow and deliberate, and warmed their hands by the morning fire. Bread and ale awaited them, simple, but enough. Soon, the courtyard filled with sound again, hooves striking stone, the clang of buckets, voices rising with the day. The rhythm of life shifted once more from rest to motion, yet beneath it all lingered the unseen foundation of the night, the discipline that had held the darkness at bay. For every castle's strength was not measured only by its walls or weapons, but by its order, the quiet cooperation of those who knew their place in the turning of time. Each guard, servant, and steward was a thread in the vast fabric of the night, woven together by duty, endurance, and the unspoken promise that the flame of vigilance would never fade. And so the castle lived on through every winter and every watch, bound by discipline, warmed by routine, and carried forward on the steady breath of those who labored while others dreamed. Life in the watchtower, the castle, had grown still. Beyond its high walls, the valley slept beneath a quilt of frost and silence. Inside, torches sputtered and whispered, their flames bending to every wandering breath of air. From the lower gatehouse to the high, wind-lashed parapets, the sentinels of the night took their posts. This was the hour when warmth retreated and endurance began, when every watchtower became a small world of its own. In the northern tower, the air was sharp as broken glass. Frost crept over the stones, and each exhale hung like mist before vanishing into darkness. A young guard leaned against the wall, his wool cloak drawn tight, the iron of his helmet already cold against his brow. He rubbed his hands together, then cupped them before the tiny brazier glowing at his feet. Its coals hissed softly, breathing a faint red light across the flagstones. He listened to the sigh of wind through the arrow slits, to the rhythmic groan of the wooden beams, to the slow heartbeat of the night itself. Every sound was a companion, every silence a test of nerve. He turned now and again toward the valley, where the world lay drowned in fog. Somewhere below, a river murmured beneath a skin of ice, and the stars shimmered dimly above the mist, distant and watchful. The guard thought of home, a small cottage beyond the town, where his wife and child slept beside a hearth. That warmth felt like another world entirely. But duty was a fortress, and he stood within it. Far below him, in the eastern watch, another tower stirred with life. Here the men were older, their armor softened by years of wear. 2 guards shared their posts beside the gate arch, taking turns to pace the narrow floor. Theirs was the tower of the threshold, the gate that never truly slept. From time to time, a stable boy passed through with a lantern, leading a horse to the outer yard or checking the latch on the wooden door. The faint light painted the walls amber for a moment, then faded again. A kettle of thin broth simmered on the brazier's rim. One man poured himself a cup, the steam curling into the cold. "Quiet night," he murmured. His companion nodded. They did not need to say more. Quiet was good. Quiet meant no alarm, no echoing horns, no shadows moving beyond the wall. Yet even in calm, they remained alert, because in a fortress, peace was something one guarded, not something one trusted. The western tower faced the courtyard. There, the watch had a different rhythm. More voices, more warmth, the faint spill of firelight from the kitchens below. Through the open floor grates came the soft clatter of pots and the laughter of tired servants finishing their work. A sleepy cook stepped outside once to shake crumbs from his apron, looked up at the tower, and raised a hand in greeting. The guard above nodded back, smiling faintly, though his breath made no sound. In this tower warmth lingered. The stones still held the memory of day, but ebonary. The hours stretched long. One guard leaned against the wall, his eyes tracing the arc of the moon as it climbed across the narrow slit of sky. Another hummed under his breath, a tune so low it almost merged with the wind. Together they watched over the silent heart of the castle, listening to the pulse of life below, the low murmur of voices, the faint snore of someone asleep near the kitchen fire, the quiet tread of a monk on his way to midnight prayers. Up above, the southern tower was lonelier still. It stood apart, high on the inner curtain wall, where the wind sang endlessly through the cracks. There, a single guard kept watch. An older man, scarred and patient, who had seen too many winters to be bothered by the cold. His post overlooked the forest's edge, and though the darkness below seemed endless, he felt its moods as if it were alive when the air shifted, when the owls called, when the frost thickened on the leaves. He stood there hour after hour, his cloak heavy with ice, and yet he was content. He had long since learned that solitude could be its own kind of company. The stars were steady companions. The moon was a silent overseer. Sometimes he whispered a few words to the night, a small prayer, or a memory half-spoken, and in the stillness, it felt as though the castle itself listened. The inner tower, near the Lord's Hall, held a gentler duty. 2 young pages sat there, keeping the watchfire alive. Their armor was too big for them, their eyes heavy with sleep. Yet they tried to sit upright, their wooden spears resting against the wall. The glow from the brazier painted their faces gold, and one boy nodded forward, nearly dozing, before jerking himself awake. "Only till the bell," the other whispered, stifling a yawn. "Then we can rest." Outside, bells marked the passing hours, slow, resonant, comforting. The castle breathed in rhythm with them. Somewhere, a door creaked. Somewhere else, a horse stamped its hoof in the stable. Life continued, quiet but steady. As the night deepened, frost rimed the battlements, and the air grew thick with the scent of wood smoke. The watchmen shifted their weight, stamped their feet, and pulled their cloaks closer. In T-towers, their torches burned lower, oil running thin, and yet none abandoned their posts. The rhythm of watch and rest, of duty and silence, was the unseen heartbeat that kept the castle alive. When the hour before dawn arrived, that still a blue moment when night feels eternal, the guards in each tower sensed the same thing. A faint lightning in the east, a subtle warmth in the air. They did not speak of it, but it threaded through their weariness like hope. The young guard in the northern tower smiled faintly to himself, watching the fog begin to glow with pale silver. The old sentinel in the south straightened his back, breathing in the scent of morning frost. And slowly, as if guided by an ancient rhythm, the castle began to stir. A cook's fire flared in the lower kitchens. Somewhere, a rooster crowed, muffled but clear. The sound of wooden shutters opening carried faintly upward. The guards blinked against the dawn, their eyes dry from sleeplessness. They had kept their vigil through the long hours, as others had done before them, and others would again. When the relief bell finally sounded, its tone rolled across the towers like a sigh of release. One by one, the watchmen descended the narrow stairs, their boots echoing softly in the stone. Their replacements climbed past them, fresh faces, half awake, greeting them with nods and murmured words. Soon the towers would belong to another shift, another watch. But for a brief moment, as the first sunlight touched the highest parapet, the castle stood between worlds. Not night, not day, but the quiet breath between. The guards paused, looking eastward. The horizon bloomed with gold, and the frost on the stones caught the light like silver threads. For a heartbeat, warmth seemed to return not from fire, but from the promise of morning itself. And then, as the sun rose and the bells began to toll for prayer, the castle returned to life once more, strong, silent, and steadfast. The watchtowers, keepers of its dreams, sank into shadow again, waiting for the next night to begin. The castle never sleeps beneath the silver wash of moonlight. The castle breathed like a living thing. From its towers to its cellars, faint sounds stirred soft, regular, and human. The outer ramparts still glittered with torchlight, where the watchmen kept their silent vigil. But within the thick stone heart of the fortress, life persisted in quieter rhythms. In the great kitchen, long after the evening meal had ended, embers still glowed under iron pots. A single cook moved among them, stirring what remained of a stew meant for the guards coming off duty at dawn. The smell of broth and barley lingered in the cold air, blending with the faint smoke of damp firewood. Every so often, the cook's wooden spoon tapped the side of the cauldron, a small sound, but in the stillness of midnight, it echoed like a clock marking the slow passage of hours. Down in the stables, horses shifted restlessly, their breath misting in the lantern glow. The stable boy, no more than 15, worked by instinct, now checking the hay, running his hands along the flank of a drowsing mare, whispering to keep the animals calm. He had grown used to the night's chorus, The muffled clop of hooves, the rattle of tack, the crackle of frost creeping across the rafters. In a world built of stone and discipline, his small, wordless kindness was a kind of warmth. In another wing of the castle, faint light spilled through the cracks of the chapel door. Within, 2 monks knelt before the altar, their voices barely above a whisper. They prayed for souls, for the safety of travelers, for the health of the Lord's family, for those who kept watch on the frozen walls. The soft chant rose and fell, merging with the hum of the brazier near the altar. Each word dissolved into the air like a breath of incense, unseen but present, a rhythm as ancient as the stones themselves. Elsewhere, in the upper chambers, the servants of the household moved like ghosts. One tended to the fire in the great hall, piling logs and coaxing sparks from the ash. Another folded linens, careful not to wake the sleeping children in the adjoining room. The castle's lady slept lightly. A maid kept vigil near her chamber, a candle trembling in her hand each time the wind whispered through the shutters. From the battlements above came the faint clang of a bell. Not an alarm, but the gentle marking of the hour. The guards on duty changed posts, their boots striking against the flagstones. The bell's echo traveled through the courtyard and into the corridors, weaving a single thread through every chamber. It reminded all who heard it, the cook, the monk, the stable boy, the maid, that though the castle seemed still, it was never truly asleep. In the cold infirmary, a healer wrapped blankets around an injured soldier. His breathing was slow but steady, his face pale in the candlelight. She dipped a cloth into warm water, wiped his brow, and murmured something soft. A promise, perhaps, or a prayer. Outside, the wind howled briefly, then moved on, leaving behind a deep hush that felt almost sacred. Near the armory, a blacksmith's apprentice worked on a single horseshoe, striking it once, twice, then letting the hammer rest. He wasn't meant to work this late, but he preferred the quiet hours when the forge was his alone. Sparks danced for a moment before fading to red embers. Elian de Vark wiped his brow and listened to the creak of the timbers, the distant murmur of guards, the living heartbeat of the fortress around him. Not all within the castle were so disciplined. In the lower hall, 2 sentries off duty shared a mug of ale, speaking in low tones about their homes, their families, and the endless winter. Their laughter, soft, restrained, filled the room like a brief warmth. Then, hearing footsteps in the corridor, they straightened their backs, their mirth dissolving into duty. Even the smallest moment of levity had its place in the long night, as fleeting as firelight. In the courtyard, snow had begun to fall again, fine, slow, and silent. It gathered on the helmets of the sentries, softened the harsh outlines of the towers, and blanketed the cobblestones in silver. One guard, weary from hours of pacing, tilted his head toward the sky and watched the flakes drift down. For a moment, he imagined himself far away, by a hearth with friends, before returning to the rhythm of his post. Step, breathe, listen. From above, the castle must have looked eternal. A patchwork of glowing windows and quiet shadows, alive in every corner. Beneath its towers, every role and rank, every breath and prayer, formed a single harmony. The guards watched, the servants tended, the cooks, the monks, the healers, the tired apprentices, all worked in unspoken unity, their lives woven through the same unyielding walls. Ors, passed. The moon sank lower, pale and cold, brushing the towers with silver. Inside, the fires burned low, embers pulsing softly like the heartbeat of the castle itself. In the great hall, the last servant finished her work and sat for a moment beside the hearth, rubbing her hands and closing her eyes. She could hear the distant bell, the murmur of the wind, the faint cry of an owl beyond the gate. It was all part of the same ancient rhythm, the rhythm of life in stone. And so the castle endured. Through the longest winters, through storms and silence, through generations of sleepless nights, it remained awake, its walls holding warmth, prayer, duty, and memory. To live within such walls was to share in their patience. To keep watch through the night was to join the unbroken chain of souls who had done the same for centuries. The castle never truly slept, it only dreamed, quietly, through the hands and hearts of those who served within it. Voices in the cold, the northern wind had a language of its own. A low, endless murmur that swept through ramparts, arrow slits, and open courtyards. It carried with it the breath of snow, the whisper of pine forests, and the distant memory of sea spray frozen to silence. In the high castles of the north, the guards learned to understand that voice. It was the companion that never left them. Cruel, steady, and ancient as the stone beneath their boots. In the fortress of Anak, standing firm against the North Sea, a watchman named Edwin leaned upon his spear and stared into the fog. The torches behind him flickered, casting long shadows across the parapet. It was the hour before dawn, when the world was neither dark nor light, and time itself seemed to pause. He listened for the sound of approaching riders, but heard only the hum of wind through the merlin. Beneath his cloak of wool and fur, Edwin carried a small token, a wooden carving of a sparrow. His wife had given it to him before he left their village, saying it would remind him that even in the coldest place, something small and living could endure. On long nights, when the wind screamed and his fingers grew numb, he would rub the tiny bird smooth between his palms, feeling warmth rise again. He had kept that watch for 8 winters, and though the faces of his comrades changed, the sparrow never left his side. Far to the west, in the highlands of Scotland, stood a castle whose towers were forever wrapped in mist. The guards there were chosen for their endurance, men who could stand still through hours of wind and sleet. Among them was Muir, a quiet man with eyes like iron. He had once been a shepherd before the Lord took him into service, and the silence of the hills still followed him. Each night he climbed the narrow stairs to the highest tower, where the world seemed to end in a sea of clouds. From that height, he could see the faint glow of villages below, tiny fires trembling in the valley like scattered stars. Sometimes, when the clouds parted, he could even see the northern lights shimmering above the horizon, green and pale as spirits dancing. On those nights he felt the stone beneath his feet as part of the same earth that bore his sheep years ago, and though the cold bit through his cloak, he smiled, remembering the sound of bells in summer fields. Across the sea, in Denmark, the guards of Kronborg Castle fought a different kind of cold. One born of the sea, the salt wind left frost upon their beards, and the waves below crashed endlessly against the cliff walls. Here, the night was alive with echoes, the cry of gulls, the rattle of chains from ships in harbor, the hollow ring of armor plates shifting in the dark. One young sentry, Eric, found peace in rhythm. Each night, he walked the length of the wall 100 times, counting his steps against the heartbeat of the tide. He spoke to the sea as if it were a fellow guard, telling it of his home across the fjord, of his father lost to a storm, of the promise he made to endure. In the long hours before dawn, the sea always answered back, not with words, but with the same endless roar that had comforted sailors for centuries. And farther still, in the icy fortresses of Norway, the guards learned to battle not only the cold, but the silence. The snow there fell so thick that sound itself seemed swallowed. The world became soft and white, the horizon erased. In one small mountain stronghold, a watchpost jutted from the cliffside, where only one man could stand at a time. His name was Leif, and the isolation suited him. He kept a journal, a rarity among guards, though his hands often trembled too much to write. In it, he recorded what he saw and heard. A wolf howling across the ravine, a lantern flickering in the distance, the way ice formed along the edge of his spear. But what he truly captured were the thoughts of a man who stood between darkness and dawn, between duty and dreaming. He wrote, "The fire in the brazier burns as though it knows fear. I envy its courage. I wonder if the stones themselves remember all the men who once stood here before me, if they whisper our names to the snow when we are gone." Somewhere to the east, in the forests of Poland, a different kind of night watch unfolded. The castles there were wooden fortresses, thick, resin-scented walls instead of stone. The guards shared the towers with ravens that perched on the beams and muttered in the dark. They were not unfriendly birds. In fact, many believed they were omens of protection. When the firewood ran low and frost crept along the floorboards, a single raven's croak could feel like company. A sentry named Tomasz kept one such companion. The bird arrived one winter night, and never left, nesting above the watch, post and watching with bright, intelligent eyes. Tomasz called it Charny. The black one. He would talk to it softly while tending the fire, telling stories of battles and harvests. When the raven mimicked his cough or whistle, he laughed, a sound rare and brief on a watchtower. In time, others said that when Tomasz was away, the raven called his name into the night, as though refusing to forget him. Through all these castles of stone, of timber, of ice, and wind, the same rhythm held true. One man awake while others slept. One flame against the dark. Each guard, in his own solitude, became a small note in the great song of endurance that echoed across centuries. Sometimes they sang softly under their breath, old songs from home. Sometimes they prayed, or sharpened blades they'd never need to use, or simply stared into the dark until the first light touched the battlements. Yet whether in Anik or Kronborg, in misty hills or frozen fjords, the feeling was always the same, that they were part of something larger, a quiet brotherhood of sleepless souls, watching over the world as it dreamed. And when dawn came, when the wind soft, when the frost glittered like glass on the stones, they knew they had survived another night. The sparrow in a pocket, the raven on a beam, the whisper of waves, and the hum of prayers, all of it became one memory, shared across borders, beyond time. The northern castles slept, but their guards never truly did. Their breath still lingers in the wind, their steps still echo faintly in the stones, and if one listens closely, beneath the howl of the cold and the sigh of the sea, their voices can still be heard, the soft murmur of those who once kept the night. Echoes beyond the walls, the first light of dawn came slowly to the northern castles, not with warmth, but with a pale shimmer that turned every frost crystal into a shard of silver. The guards descended from their posts, their cloaks stiff with ice, their breath rising like smoke from extinguished fires. Below, the courtyards stirred. Horses stamped their hooves, kitchen fires crackled to life, and the long quiet of the night dissolved into the murmuring rhythm of another day. Yet even as the sun climbed, the cold lingered. It lived not just in the air, but in the memory of every man who had kept the night's vigil. For the watchtower, once climbed, never truly left a soul. Its silence followed them wherever they went, across fields, through villages, into age itself. Edwin, the sentry of Anik, would one day return home, his hair turned gray, the small wooden sparrow still tucked into his pocket. He built a small cottage by the sea and often walked the cliffs at dusk. When the wind rose, he would pause and listen, hearing in its cry the faint echo of his old post. The gulls wheeled above him like ghosts of forgotten centuries, and the sea, restless as ever, seemed to call his name in a language only the cold remembered. Sometimes, on winter evenings, he would light a lantern outside his door, a single, flickering flame in the darkness, and say softly, for those still watching, in Scotland, Muir lived to see his castle crumble. Long after his service had ended, he returned to find it abandoned, its stones slick with moss, its towers hollow. The wind still passed through the arrow slits, making the same low moan he had once known so well. He stood where his feet had planted so many times before and felt the same quiet weight of the world pressing around him. He knelt and placed his hand upon the cold stone, whispering, "We are still here." The air did not answer, yet he thought he felt the tower breathe slow, ancient, and alive. That night, as he slept by the ruined gatehouse, snow began to fall, covering the scars of time in silence. Across the sea, Eric of Kronborg never left the sound of waves behind. Even when he grew too old to climb the walls, he would walk the harbor each morning and count his steps, just as he had done as a young guard. The sailors called him Old Tidewalker, and when storms rolled in, they would look to him as a sign of endurance. One night, when the sea rose wild and the sky cracked with lightning, he stood at the edge of the pier and whispered to the storm, "You and I have watched together long enough." The next morning, the sea was calm again, and Eric was gone, leaving only his cloak tangled in the ropes of a ship. Some said he had gone back to the sea that had once kept him company, to walk the walls of a castle no one could see. Leif, the solitary watcher of the Norwegian mountains, was remembered through his writings. Long after the fortress was abandoned, a traveler found his small leather-bound journal frozen beneath the stones. The ink had bled with time, but the words could still be read. The night is not the enemy. It is the listener, and I, who stand in silence, am its voice. Those who found the journal brought it down to the valley, where monks copied the pages by candlelight. For years, the words of a simple guard echoed in abbeys and halls, read by kings and shepherds alike. Few knew his name, yet all felt the same hush when they reached that line. The Northern Watch had spoken, and the world had listened. In Poland, Tomasz and his raven lived to see peace. The castle became a manor, the wars faded, and trade replaced fear. Yet still, each night, he climbed the tower steps, lantern in hand, the raven gliding just ahead of him. When he grew too frail to climb, he left his post to another, a young boy from the village, and gifted him a black feather, saying, "A guard never truly leaves. He just watches from further away." Years later, when Tomasz was gone, villagers swore that on cold nights, the raven still circled the tower, crying softly into the mist. So it was across the north. The men who stood watch became part of the places they guarded. The stones absorbed their patience, the wind carried their songs, and even the snow seemed to remember their breath. In time, when travelers passed by old ruins, they sometimes claimed to hear faint footsteps or see a dim light where no fire burned. Not haunting, but watching eternal vigilance, carved into the heart of winter itself. As centuries turned, and castles fell to ruin or were remade into manors and museums, the echoes of those cold nights remained. Soldiers, lighthouse keepers, and sentinels of later ages would tell the same stories, of feeling unseen eyes upon them, of hearing voices in the wind that spoke not in words, but in knowing. Perhaps that is what the watchtower truly was. Not a place, but a promise, a vow that someone, somewhere, would always keep the light. And so, when night falls across the north, when snow begins to drift and the world grows still, the old watchtowers breathe again. Their walls, cracked and ivy-bound, remember every footstep, every whispered prayer. They stand not for war or warning, but for the quiet courage of those who simply stayed through darkness, through cold, through time itself. If one walks beneath their shadow today, listening closely, the wind still hums a tune of devotion, the same melody that once lulled the gods to thought and the world to sleep. A soft voice seems to rise from the stones. The night is long, but the watches remain. And perhaps, in that murmur, we hear not the ghosts of the past, but a gentle invitation to be still, to listen, and to remember that even in the coldest silence, the world keeps its quiet watch. The warmth of dawn. The castle breathes again, the night is nearly spent. The final watch stands upon the wall. Frost gathers on his cloak, and his breath drifts pale and slow against the paling sky. The torches burn low, their flames bending in the faint, tender wind that comes before dawn. For hours, the world has been held in stillness, a quiet deeper than words. The only sounds have been the creak of timber, the hush of the wind along the ramparts, the soft clink of a sword against stone. Now, as the darkness thins, even these fall away. Far to the east, the first faint color touches the horizon, a fragile bloom of rose and silver. It creeps along the clouds, spreads across the sleeping land, and finds its way to the castle walls. The frost that clung to the battlements begins to soften, and the night's long breath exhales into the new day. The last guard leans upon his spear. His eyes, heavy with weariness, trace the slow rising of the light. It feels not like a beginning, but a mercy. The sun, patient and kind, returns as it has 1,000 times before, and the man upon the wall bows his head as if in prayer. Below him, the castle is still wrapped in shadows. The towers stand like sentinels of stone, cold and watchful, their edges gilded by the coming dawn. But within, beneath those weighty walls, life is already stirring. In the great kitchen, an ember winks to life in the hearth. A woman bends over it, coaxing the coals with a twist of straw. The glow spreads, catching on her face and hands, and soon the room is breathing again the crackle of fire, the faint scent of smoke and bread. Pots are lifted, water poured, and the first warmth of morning begins its quiet work. Into chapel a bell sounds, one soft, distant, like a sigh. The monks move through the narrow passageways, their robes whispering across the floor. They light candles, their small flames rising against the stone. A voice begins the first prayer of the day, low, melodic, steady as the heartbeat of the castle itself. Through the stables, steam rises from the breath of horses. The stable hands move gently, murmuring to the beasts as they toss hay into the mangers. Hooves shuffle, chains rattle, and the heavy scent of life fills the air, earthy, warm, comforting. Outside, the sky brightens to gold. The smith has come early. He stands before the forge, its coals still asleep, and strikes flint to steel. The spark leaps, catches, and the fire answers. First with a hiss, then with a soft roar. The sound is almost music. He smiles, stretching his arms toward the heat, the lines of labor and years deep on his face. Across the courtyard, a boy runs, his bare feet leaving marks in the frost. He carries a bucket of water from the well, sloshing and laughing as he goes. His laughter rings against the stone, the first bright sound of the day. It startles a bird from its perch, and the flutter of wings joins the morning's rising symphony. Slowly, steadily, the castle awakens. Door bolts slide back. Footsteps echo. Women carry bread from the oven, its crust shining, its scent soft and sweet. Servants sweep the great hall, shaking out the night's chill from their cloaks. Some speak quietly, some hum to themselves, all wrapped in the hush of early light. The guards, their long watch finally done, descend from the towers. Frost clings to their cloaks like silver dust. They do not speak much, only nod to the ones who take their place. The changing of the watch is simple, timeless, sacred. The warmth of dawn touches their tired faces, and the relief is quiet but deep. For a moment, one of them pauses by the gatehouse and looks up at the brightening sky. The same stars that guided him through the night now fade, their light surrendering to the sun. He thinks not in words, but in a kind of still knowing that his duty, though small, is part of something vast. Every night, across centuries, men like him have kept their posts. Every dawn, the world has been handed back to the living. The storyteller's voice slows, softens, almost a whisper now. The warmth moves through the corridors like a spirit. The walls, once cold and silent, begin to breathe again, exhaling the moisture of night, welcoming the new day. The tapestries stir in the gentle draft, their colors alive once more. Even the stones seem to glow, touched by sunlight that glances off their edges, seeping into cracks and corners. Somewhere in the upper chambers, a noble woman opens her shutters. She stands, wrapped in furs, gazing out across the waking land. Smoke rises from the village below, curling into the pale sky. The air smells of bread, horses, and the faint promise of spring. She closes her eyes. Somewhere deep within the castle, a bird begins to sing. And so it is, every morning, in every age, the same unspoken ritual. The cold yields to light, silence gives way to sound, and stone gives back the warmth it has held all night. The castle breathes again. The storyteller pauses, letting the soundscape fill the silence. A fire crackling, distant bells, the soft murmur of people beginning their day. He speaks again, quieter still. The night was long. The cold was fierce. But it passed, as all nights do. And what remains is the quiet proof of endurance. The small fire that never truly died. Every stone, every ember, every heartbeat within these walls tells the same truth. That warmth returns, always, to those who keep watch with patience and faith. The guard who once stood on the tower now sleeps. His cloak rests upon the chair, his hands folded upon his chest. The faint sunlight plays across his face, softening the lines of duty and years. Outside, the bells ring again, not for alarm, but for beginning. In the courtyard, a woman carries a basket of bread. A child follows behind her, chasing his own shadow. The smith laughs from his forge, and somewhere a dog barks, just once, as if to announce that all is well. The world turns, slow and certain. The warmth of dawn deepens. The castle, alive once more, holds within its walls not only the echoes of night, but the promise of countless mornings yet to come. The storyteller's voice fades to a near whisper. The watch is over. The fires burn again. The day has begun, and with that the story opens into silence. The sound of gentle wind through the battlements, the rhythmic crackle of fire, the distant hum of morning life. A moment passes still and golden. Thank you, dear listener, for walking through the night with Go to Sleep Historian. Through the cold and the quiet, through the whispers of stone and flame, you have reached the light of dawn. If your eyes grow heavy now, rest easy. The fires are lit, the castle is safe, and the morning keeps its gentle watch in your place. May your dreams be warm as the first rays of sun upon the walls of an old fortress. May your heart rest in peace, knowing that every night, no matter how long, ends in light. Thank you for joining us tonight. Good night, and sleep well, until the next story begins.